Well, David, thank you so much for being here, man. It's such an honor and a blessing, and I just feel like I'm hanging out with a bro. We might as well be at McGavick's having coffee or
Well,
something.
I feel like with you and your family, we're over from Australia, so we don't have extended family here. We just have, Helen and I have our kids. And with you guys, I don't know, we pray for your family most nights, and I don't know, we feel connected, and I love it that you're committed to doing something important, sharing the hope in Jesus through music. So Godspeed, rock and roll bloke.
Well, dude, we're grateful for you guys. Appreciate you being willing to just stop by today and invest in Christian music makers. I know folks will be stoked to learn from you. And this morning, actually, I have a couple of questions to ask you that came in through Instagram because I got on my stories and just said, hey, if you could be mentored by David, what would you ask?
Oh,
if you have one
serious?
question. Yeah. And so I fit one of those questions in because it was just too good not to. But let's start with this. Let's start with the early days. You made some costly decisions early in your life to follow God's lead, even when it meant starting over in a foreign country and moving your young kids and your wife across the ocean. How did you discern God's voice in those moments?
I'd lost everything on a big tour. Tried to trade out of it in Australia, was unsuccessful in that. And I remember going to Helen, shaking in my boots and saying, hey, babe, I think the only way we can get ahead is go to America. I thought she'd say no, and I knew it was going to change our life.
Yeah.
She said, okay, David, we'll go for 2 years. And 33 years later, we're still here. So, you asked me how I heard. I don't think that my mother-in-law wanted me to get into real estate. And at that time, I could think of nothing worse. I need to be involved in something purposeful. So I'm so grateful to Helen that she said yes. Now, she did have that 2-year condition, but it took us 2 years to get the first album out with Rebecca. And so we lived in poverty for the first 2 years here, and probably the greatest experience of my life. My kids, Helen and I, we saw Jesus move in our family. And almost now I recommend it for everybody. Do it tough for a little while, and then you'll see the miraculous.
Yeah, I mean, some folks would have seen the film Unsung Hero, which was based on your guys' life. And what was it like for you watching your family story on the big screen? Like, what does that feel like to have a major Hollywood movie made about you?
Helen and I had nothing to do with it, and so our kids really produced it and directed it. And they sent us the script. Helen read it and went back to him and said, just make sure you don't leave out the miraculous. I started to read it and I thought, I'm such a strong-willed guy. I shouldn't continue to read. So I just said, guys, this needs to be your overview of our life in coming to America. I'm not going to read it. And what then ended up happening is in promoting the movie, a lot of people didn't think it was going to work. So we worked pretty hard. I would do all the B and C level interviews that Joel and Luke couldn't do. And then the Christmas before it came out, we had influencer showings on our Christmas tour for King Country's Christmas tour. And I would be interviewed after each of those showings. And I think there was about 16 showings. I think I cried every time. Every time I'd see it, I'd see something different. And my major takeaway is that God is good. I'm so glad that a project that my sons wanted to do impacted a lot of people. The best memory I have is, I think it was in Tulsa. So we had the film people were there, and they would ask everyone to do a commentary after seeing the movie, this Christmas before last, and in the hope that if they needed to re-edit the movie at all, they could do it. And this one guy, I was walking from the theater back to the venue where we were doing a concert that night, and I read all the comments, and this one guy said, after seeing the movie today, I'm going to go home and love my family better. And I thought, even if the movie's unsuccessful, it's doing its job. Because you know what us men are like. Sometimes we get distracted from trying to keep the wolf from the door. about what's important, being a good husband, being a good father. And I thought, well, he picked that up, all the blood, sweat, and tears that went into this movie. It's worthwhile.
You mentioned crying at certain scenes. Were there particular moments that were specifically emotional or even brought back memories of hard times? Was there anything about it, I guess, that was hard to watch?
Yeah, good question. Goes back to that comment that God is good. The major takeaway from that tough 2-year season when we first came here, when we were living in poverty, I was trying to get work in the industry and got rejected, across the board. And Helen didn't criticize me. And had she criticized me at that time, I think I would have had a nervous breakdown, because my mum, I was 42 at the time, my mum had a nervous breakdown at that age. So it's in the genes a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a funny kind of way, I think there were probably tears of joy, because I knew the end of the story, even watching those things. But I am, if I'm not the most grateful 75-year-old I'm one of those. And it's because of that story when I saw the hands and feet of Jesus. And I've told people this, I think maybe why we went through that season was for me to grow, for me to move from lukewarm to passionate. And if Helen has a problem with me today, it's, I'll talk to people out at the restaurant, the next table, and she says, David, I don't always like it when you don't focus on me, but I love it the way you're able to talk about Jesus within 2 minutes. And I just, I'm an old bloke. It's not my first rodeo, but I think the Christian life is so life-giving. The way of the culture, the way of the world, to me is a culture of death. The way of Jesus is the culture of life. And I think the movie reminded me of that in a deep place.
Yeah, the film, it highlights Helen's role powerfully. Why do you think it was important to tell her story as part of yours?
I think in current culture, the role of the woman is underrated. And Helen trained to be an occupational therapist, but all she wanted to do once we got married is stop practicing, stay home, and have children. And I think my hope is that women are reminded of their important role when the culture is saying, now you need to go out and work and get rich. And in a funny kind of way, Helen's role in that movie was counterculture. And she was saying, no, it's important to stay home, love on the kids, love on my husband. Interesting thought on that is we were only going to have 4 because both of us come from families of 4. And I had the privilege of every night praying and singing and talking to the kids to put them down to bed. And it was therapeutic for me because the music business is a bit of a crapshoot. And I needed that. It was almost every day it was therapy. So after the first 4, I remember I went to Helen and said, hey, babe, can we have more? Because the kids were so life-giving to me. And I think when we first got married, I was a very selfish guy. And I think I needed to have 7 kids to challenge my selfishness. But Helen was the hero in that she was strong on discipline at home. She's very loving. And as you know, in today's culture, the people in the culture and the media don't always respect family and motherhood. And my hope is that those who are on the fence, do I go back to the work or do I stay home and have lots of kids? My hope is that they'll have lots of kids and in a perfect world have 7. What do you think, rock and roll bloke?
Well, as a father of only 3, I just relate with the selfishness part. We've talked a lot about it in the last few years especially. I just feel like a lot of growth has happened in both of us, and some of the health issues that you guys know a lot about have just brought up new opportunities for that growth. And so I've gotten misty-eyed more than once just in a way, apologizing for my 20s, apologizing for the kind of husband that if I knew then what I know now,
Yeah.
I would have done it different. And I think sometimes it's, yeah, at least for my wife, it's been important for her to hear that,
Yeah.
you know, like if I knew then what I know now, I would have loved you better. I would have been more present. I wouldn't have said things the way I said them. I wouldn't have approached you the way I approached you,
Mm.
and,
My logic on that is, because I think that time of reflection is very good, but for you and I to challenge ourselves and challenge other men who are watching this to ongoing do it better.
Yeah.
It's funny, we never get it perfect, but I think having that goal, how can I love my family better? How can I share the hope in Jesus more loudly? I think one of the things that I think happens to us men, well, we think someone else can do it. We think the pastor at the church, well, that's his role to be evangelistic. No, I think it's all our roles. And then I think to be challenged, well, to be practical. And my family will tell you that I'm not always as practical as I want to be, but it is I'm pondering it daily, how can I do the little things better?
Mm-hmm. You're not just a legendary music industry gentleman. You've also raised some very famous kids. For those listening that don't know, David is not just the manager, but the dad of Joel and Luke from For King and Country, Rebecca St. James, and really all your kids they're messing in things that are changing lives. You've raised multiple children who are not only successful, but passionate about ministry. And what were some intentional things you and Helen did to cultivate both faith and creativity at home?
When we were in Australia, we had the kids at a Christian school, and that came out of when Rebecca first went to school. We had her in a public school, and she'd come home crying every day. She was, the culture really challenged her. We moved her to a Christian school, and she just loved it. And I think in Australia, we just had a traditional life. We lived in a really nice house on 5 acres in Glenorrey in Sydney. And life was pretty good. We went to Hillsong Church for a while. I think when the rubber hit the road was when we came to America and came over to work for somebody. He let me go after 2 months, and we were struggling to survive because we had no income. So we became very much a praying family. And I remember Joel praying at 7. I still remember that prayer in our house in Brentwood, no furniture, praying fervently that we'd be able to pay the rent, that we'd have enough food on the table, and it all happened. Then when Rebecca's career started, Helen made a decision not to put the kids into the local public school, which was half a mile down the road, but to homeschool. So then the kids traveled the world with Rebecca, being her production crew, selling merch, being her support. So we threw the kids in. I remember Josh, my youngest son, running a follow spot at 8. Then he went on to run all of Rebecca's merch at 14. Joel and Luke were both doing production. So we threw them in at the deep end in their very young teenagers. I remember we were up in, this is probably 27 years ago, we were up in, where was it? New York. We're in a union building. And Joel, I think he was either 13 or 14 at the time, he was the stage manager. The union comes to us and says, hey, we're not going to listen to a 14-year-old stage manager. We have to get somebody else to do that job. Our sound guy, Ralph, went to the union guy and said, okay, if you're going to insist on that, there's no concert tonight and you're not going to get paid. And so they changed their mind. At the end of the night, the union was so impressed, they gave Joel a union T-shirt. So it went from one extreme to the other. And I think we threw the kids in the deep end. We were working them 12-hour days. We'd start, in their young teenage years, and even with Josh, when he was 8, being the follow spot operator. And I think there was something about that, doing it as a family, which was pretty life-giving to them.
Yeah, so they developed a work ethic early. Have you seen the difference between artists in music that have a work ethic versus those that don't and their success?
Looking back now, getting involved with production at such a young age, that has allowed them to be on the cutting edge. And
Mm,
so they're always, with Joel being the stage manager, we'd go into a lot of churches in those early days, and we'd have to build a stage because they didn't have a platform to perform on. So I think the end result of that apprenticeship starting some 27, 28 years ago was the last tour we did, the last fall tour last year. They had 9 pods on stage. So the drummer had his own pod, the guitarist had his own pod. So that there was 9 pods going 40, 50 feet in the air, all at different angles. And that got everyone's attention. And it gladdened my heart that my sons were prepared to invest in the future, because what a lot of artists do, they want to maximize profit. And so they'll minimize their production so they can take more money home. My sons made a decision, no, we're going to do a production that is competitive with mainstream. And, a lot of people came back and said, we've never seen anything like it. And it was competitive. It was probably unprecedented in our genre and paralleled a lot of the very creative productions going on in mainstream music. And I believe that all came out of that experience 27 years ago. That's their college. That was their college education, on the road, doing things, making mistakes, learning how to do it differently. And then I think they also learned in that process something about the creativity. They're pretty creative in their approach, and I think that's come from throwing them in at the deep end very young.
I remember back when we lived in San Diego, this was before we knew you guys, going to a For King and Country show
Oh, really?
at the Aztec Arena.
Uh,
And yeah, that was the feeling. I mean, since the late 90s, early 2000s, I was on the road, been in Christian
Yeah.
concert environments a
Yeah.
lot. And we went to take our kids when they were very little, and
Huh.
our minds were blown.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it felt
Wow.
just like you said, just like any of the biggest shows on earth, I'd love to see them at the Sphere in Vegas. I think that would be fun.
Yeah.
This might be too personal, so just tell me to step off and we can move on. But
You don't know me very well.
how have you balanced the tension between being a father and a manager with your own kids?
Not always sure that I've balanced it well. I think one of the things that we stumbled over in the early days of Rebecca was that we would have a devotional and prayer time before every concert. And I think that was good in reminding us of what's important, because as you know, the road is like the flesh, it's deceitful. And you can so easily forget. And you can have one concert one night, it's a full house, and the next night hardly anyone's there and you're losing money. So it tends to be an emotional roller coaster. Reminding each other of the importance of our mission. And I've attempted to do that. It probably happened 16, 17 years ago in all my business meetings, be it ministry people or commercial people, read a devotional before the meeting starts. And I think the great thing about God's word is it's a perspective giver. And one of the things that we do in For King Country is I own a third of the band. Joel owns a third. Luke owns a third. So on important decisions, whatever has the 2-man vote as the answer, that's where we go. And I think that has allowed a lot of our decisions to have wisdom, because I think sometimes a lot of artists, they get successful and they think the other team members don't have all the answers. And so some of them stop listening to their managers much. And I think there's wisdom in a multitude of counselors. And we're always wanting to learn, but I think that 3-man vote has probably protected us, because occasions I get voted out, other occasions Luke gets voted out, other occasions Joel gets voted out. But I think we respect each other enough to stay true to whatever that decision is. And I think over time, Joel and I pretty similar. So, sometimes it gets very spirited. Luke is very, he's a ministry-minded bloke. He's a gentle soul. You and Luke have a lot of similar qualities. And part of the power of Joel and Luke is they're so different. But you put them together, it's 1 + 1 = 3. Together they're able to, and we're going through this wonderful thing at the moment. There, we took this year off to write a new album and film a new film, make a new film, produce a new film. And I think the industry thought, well, maybe For King and Country have plateaued. But we started playing some of the early demos. They're in the studio today, actually. But the industry people have heard it are saying it's a notch up. And I think there may be, and this maybe some of the artists could, be interesting for them to hear this, by taking this year off instead of, because historically we've always written and recorded while we've been on the road. This year, I remember Luke coming to me and saying, Dad, for the first time in years, I'm feeling really good. And I think then, probably for the next 6-8 weeks, they've come up with a major song every week. And these yesterday, today, and tomorrow, they're recording 6 songs. And that's a product of being focused and not being distracted from the road. And being a writer-producer, it's so easy to get distracted. But I think prayerfully making time for strong creativity is maybe a little bit of a lesson that we've never had the privilege of before, but we're having it this year. And I think early signs are that industry folks are saying, hey, this new music is a notch up. So time will tell, but they say it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And, my boys have been doing this for a while now because they started so young, but I think we've learned something. I think it was an inspired moment for them to say, let's take the year off so we can listen to the Lord and come up with creative music that shares his wonder with the masses.
Was that one of those 2 votes out of 3 decisions to take the year off?
I think it was one of the few where there was the 3 voted yes. I think Joel and Luke had been going hell for leather for, I think, 13 years. And they realized for their home life, for their marriages, and also for the creativity. And I think, being able to listen to the still small voice. And you know what it's like in your world. You're doing a different ride almost every day. Sometimes it's the tyranny of the urgent. And maybe there's something in us talking about this to encourage, if any of the writers listening are getting too busy, slow down. Because I think it's been really encouraging that, the chairman of our record label has heard the new music. Jeff Roberts, who runs our booking agency, heard the new music, made him cry, and probably doesn't want me to tell people that, but Jeff, I love you. But I don't know, hadn't thought about this before, but maybe it's, if someone's feeling a bit on overload, it's a stop. Go away for a couple of days. Go away by yourself up the mountains and listen to the still small voice. And it might even be going with a co-writer who, writes well with you. I don't know. Everybody does it differently. But I can tell you, probably the last 4 or 5 years, this year has been very encouraging because we've attempted to do it in a slightly different way than we've done it in the past.
For 17 years, I was a worship pastor, and Sundays keep coming. And that was one of the things that was always challenging to me. And I didn't do it well for a lot of the time, to just make sure that I had space and margin outside of that hustle to reconnect with myself, with the Lord, with my family, and with my creativity. And so I'm glad they're doing that.
That's fascinating you mentioned this because, okay, when the kids were young and growing up, I would, for probably 10, 15 years, I had that daily therapy of singing to them, praying with them, talking to them every night as though as they were going to sleep.
Hmm.
That stopped probably, 25, 30 years ago as the kids were getting older. Now, this is crazy. Now, my daily therapy is, we live on a little farm, putting away the ducks, geese, guinea, and chickens. I do that most nights. I did that last night. There's about 150, 200 of them. And suddenly, my normal business life stops. And then I put these, and guinea are pretty stupid. Ducks like being in the creek, so I have to get them up. But it's such a contradiction to the rest of my day. I think it's therapeutic. The other thing is, I mentioned this to you earlier before we went on air. Helen came to me at the beginning of 2020 saying, let's pray together every night. Because when we first got married, we'd pray together every night and I'd go to sleep. That offended her, so we stopped doing it. We're still a praying family, but that discipline of praying every night, I think, I said to a buddy of mine last year or the year before, I said, I think I'm more in love. I was probably 73 at the time, more in love than I ever been. And, over time, things can slow down a little bit. And after I said that to him, I went home and thought a bit more about it. And I thought, well, what's changed over the last period of time? That's the only thing that had really changed. Everything else seemed pretty normal. It's that prayer time every night. And I think if there was ever any issues, we'd pray and that would lift and we'd start the next day with a clean slate. And I think that applies even to this day. We've only been doing this. I was 70 at the time when we started doing it. So I've been doing it 5 years now. I think I would encourage all couples to find a time to, and what happens at that prayer time, we will also talk about, we'll be praying and, oh, Dal, did you remember this? Or she'll say to me, oh, David, this happened today. And so we interrupt the prayer with, what's going on with the kids or something that, someone needs to be prayed for or whatever. But I think that out of everything that's happened in our marriage, that's probably been the most powerful growth moment.
You guys have inspired me and have made me uncomfortable at times, if I'm honest, with how you talk about that all the time, because it's something we've tried, and I just haven't been able to find the rhythm in our marriage. But I want that. I want to pray more.
Don't wait till you hit 70 before you do it. You go a bit earlier than me. I think what we do is, I prayed last night, she'll pray tonight, and we go through, like when Kristen had a health issue, she was part of our, this is the craziest thing. I mentioned this to you earlier. So we were praying for one lady who had a terminal lung disease. And we were praying every night, and we think, her name was Brenda. We thought, this is not going to work. Why are we praying? But we continued to pray. We continued to pray, have faith. Blow me down. What happens 6 months later? She gets a lung transplant. And now she had a year to live. Now she's got 10 years. And I just thought, you can never underestimate God. And I had my favorite sister-in-law. She passed away from cancer 12 years ago. She prayed, we prayed. She didn't get well. And she didn't look for help. She believed she was going to be miraculously healed. And sometimes the Lord listens, sometimes he doesn't. But I'm having been through that experience, particularly of coming to America 33 years ago and living off the smell of an oily rag, seeing the miraculous almost every day. I'll tell you an interesting story about that. Excuse me, getting off tangent here. So I had a radio buddy of mine come up to me. He was in town a month or two ago. Mm-hmm. He said, Smallbone, how have you gone with your kids? Because, as far as being Jesus followers, because I've got 3 kids and he works in Christian radio and none of them are following Jesus. And I said to him, well, I think they're all following Jesus at different levels. And I was trying to work out, how did that happen? And I think when we went through the hard times, the kids who were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, whatever, they saw the miraculous. They saw the hands of Jesus. And I think culture today is very negative to faith, and a lot of our kids are impacted by the culture. And I am now very grateful to the Lord. Had we not been through that experience of losing everything and seeing God's faithfulness, I think we would have lost 2 or 3 of our kids. But we didn't, because they saw it right in front of them. We were basically seeing a miracle a day, because we're on the other side of the world. We had no family here, and it was the church that loved on us. So unfortunately, I get into trouble for saying this on occasions. I'm cynical of the music business, but love the church. I love church principles. So God-honoring, so life-giving. I'm trying to bring those principles into how we do music business. And I don't always get it right, because I'm a flawed Jesus follower, but I'm serious about trying to serve him and go deeper with him. And I use the term God's economy. I share that term with everybody, because in God's economy, it's slowly but surely. We're to be faithful one day at a time. And so that's what I encourage.
What would you say to the artist who feels called by God, but their circumstances don't seem to reflect success yet?
I think what a lot of artists do is, woe is me, it's all too hard. And I was talking to somebody, where was I recently? I was saying, start writing with people in your local church. If there's no other writers in your local church, there will be writers in your local community. And then record the demos, and then send those demos to all the publishers. And the good publishers do listen. Not all the publishers do, but share it with your pastor, your worship pastor, because he will be able to connect you with other writers, with other artists. And sometimes an artist can think, well, my calling is to be an artist, but maybe it's not. Because not every artist can get on the platform and connect. But maybe it's to be a writer, because some of the greatest writers aren't artists. So finding community, and you don't need to move to Nashville. I think we can do things remotely these days. You don't need to be in Nashville, but also serve. A lot of artists are a little egocentric, and they don't understand. But what happens in our industry, if the industry sees that you're a servant, that goes a long way, because we come across a lot of people who are egocentric, don't want to serve. But it's those small things. It's the industry watching you and seeing you're taking care of those small things. That's what gets Nashville's attention. And my heroes in life are those servant-hearted people. One of those guys is the guy, Joe Polo, who runs KSBJ and YFM. He's a servant-hearted leader. And whenever I see that, it touches me in a deep place.
What qualities do you look for in an artist before you believe they're ready for a platform?
That's a very good question. What we do is not for the faint-hearted. I think consistency, never give up, because I think one of the problems we have in Nashville, a lot of people think if they go to Trevecca, they go to Lipscomb, they go to Belmont, it's going to be handed to them on a plate. No, it's hard work, and it's trying and failing, and going back to what we mentioned earlier, to serve. I know, when we come across people who want to, I think maybe the best answer is finding people who want to partner with us, because when they want to partner and they have a strong work ethic, that will overcome. But if they have a perspective where they want something to be handed to them on the plate, it's probably going to be hard for them. And doing those things that no one else is prepared to do, serving in those lowly places, because I'm a believer in God's economy. He's watching everything. And a lot of people think, oh, well, no one's going to see me do that. But our core principles for King Country are loving on the brokenhearted and sharing the most wonderful message known to man to as many people as possible. And that means trying to get our music out through Christian music, media, and also going to mainstream. But loving on the brokenhearted, you can do that, and the Lord is going to see it, and no one else is going to see it. But he is watching everything. And my challenge is to anyone listening, be faithful when no one's watching, because the Lord is.
Right.
And
Right.
this will be interesting. So I lose everything 35 years ago, and it was shaking for the old man. I shook in my boots, particularly when we came to America for 4 years. And I'm thinking to myself, what was I supposed to learn out of that? And so I'd gone to the manager of the artist at the time and said, can you give me some money back because I'm going to lose my house? They said no. They actually thought it was a bit humorous that I should expect an industry person to give money back. But the positive out of that is it forced us to come to America. Had they given us money back, we would never have come. There would have been probably no Rebecca. There'd be no For King Country. Then we start doing music in America. And I think back, well, what did I learn out of that season? And it was, if a promoter loses money on one of our concerts, we give them money back. So with Rebecca, all her career, if a promoter lost money, we gave them money back. So we had goodwill in the marketplace like you wouldn't believe. Because we do a Rebecca concert. It's going to be okay because if we lose money, they'll give money back. I remember one time we gave a guy back. He was doing it tough. We gave him back the whole fee. He couldn't believe it, and I think he got out of the business after that. But when For King and Country started 13 years ago, we did our first headlining tour the first year, and it was successful. And everybody knew, they're going to take care of us. So it was a learning curve out of a disaster. We decided to operate differently, and that gave both Rebecca and For King Country enormous goodwill in the marketplace, which particularly with new artists, it's tough getting going. If you get a song on the radio, you've got an opportunity, but starting from scratch, going back to what I said before, not for the faint-hearted.
What's one mistake you see many aspiring or established Christian artists make, and how would you encourage them to avoid it?
I think finding the right partner, finding the right manager, finding the right booking agency, doing due diligence. I heard something the other day from a good buddy of mine. He's 87, just had a stroke a year ago, and he's in church, but he kind of buys, and he's probably worth $250 million, and he's invested money for some of the richest people in business. And that's why he's done so well. And he said, when I make a critical decision on a partnership, before I finalize the deal, I take 9 meetings. And then on the 10th meeting, his wife is a very spiritual lady. He brings his wife in. And if she says, no, I don't have a good feeling about this, they don't do the deal. And I thought, due diligence. And so what I'd say to the artist, if a manager comes along to you and say, I really like you, and it could be because you just got a song on the radio, but that partnership, it's like a marriage, really. And in some cases, artist managers talk more than husband and wives talk. It's particularly in those early years. So do due diligence on who you work with, because in Christian music, a lot of managers are very good on business, but do they have a ministry mindset? And if you're serious about ministry, you want to have a manager that has a ministry mindset, and ask them the hard questions. Ask them, well, how serious are you about Jesus? Like, I'm coming here to partner in sharing this wonderful message to as many people as possible. I want to know, and do the same with your booking agency. Jeff Roberts' agency, I think they're terrific. We love them, work with those guys for 28 years, hold them in very high regard. We talk about a Jesus perspective on a regular basis, and there's very good accountability there. And I think there's a love for the church. When you come up with a partnership, just don't go into it without asking any questions.
Maybe I'm a weird one, but it's kind of ironic to me that anyone would want to get into Christian music without a ministry mindset. On one hand, what's the point? Why not just pursue another type of music?
But the biggest businesses in our genre are run by the corporations. You go up the ladder, I'm not sure, the people here in town have a Jesus perspective, but the people they report to, not necessarily so. And it's almost like, I think when you sign a deal with somebody, you need to have a joint mission statement. And that way, you can hold each other accountable. Accountability is rare in our industry, and I think the for King Country thing has worked pretty well because blood is thicker, and my sons don't always agree with me on everything, then they vote me out. I don't always agree with Joel on everything, and so Luke and I will vote him out. And then with Luke on some things, Joel and I vote him out. At my vintage, 15, accountability is a very important thing. It's almost like, don't go into your business relationships with rose-colored glasses. I remember what I was going to say before, bloom where you're planted. And going back to, you're going to have some songwriters and artists who don't live in Nashville. So maximize your ministry where you live. Be the best partner. I think one of the things that I say to our record label, and I say to other people we work with, we want to be the best partner you have. And if we're not, come and tell us, and we'll up our game. And so we have a bit of Aussie tenacity, because it wasn't easy for us to get here from the other side of the world. It was miracle after miracle. But I think, I feel funny about saying this, but our genre can be the BS world. There's a lot of suck-ups. People say, oh, you're wonderful and all that. And then, oh, I'm really that wonderful. And then they'll sign a deal, and then the new partner doesn't follow on their side of their responsibility. I would say, get good advice before you make the big decisions, but also check on character. If you don't do that, you're probably going to be disappointed, because there's some people in our industry, it's a business. They can't necessarily make it in mainstream, so they come across to Christian, because Christian is not as competitive as mainstream. And there's people in our world that can be taken advantage of. And I've been taken advantage of, but I feel hopefully in those challenging situations, somebody has seen a different aspect of Jesus. Who knows?
I've talked to artists like this. They describe how they feel as sort of like a fish out of water, because maybe their main thing is to impact lives and shepherd hearts through music. So they're very ministry-minded people. Would you have a specific advice for how they navigate the commercial side of the industry?
I think you got to have people around you who know you and encourage you, because you just nailed it. You got to know what you're called to do. I find myself at my vintage, I don't really care what most people think. And I say, well, the only person I really care what she thinks is my wife. And then she would tell you in a quiet moment, I don't even care what she thinks, which is not true. But I think knowing who you really are, because there are people in our industry who are in it for business. I have joy in the journey because I'm in the ministry. I'm passionate about sharing the hope in Jesus, and I'm looking at every way to do that. I'm an outlier in this industry. I'm not everyone's cup of tea, because my logic is to get the ministry right, the business will be okay. And I think my answer to your question is a bit roundabout. I would encourage that writer artist that you were talking about to find 3 or 4 people who are going in the same direction as they are and have regular communication with them. I have 7 accountability partners, or did have until one of those just passed away 2 months ago. So now I've got 6, and I talk to them pretty regularly. One of them I call on the way over here now. We talk about everything. We talk about ministry. We talk about temptation. We talk about marriage. We talk about children. It helps us stay grounded. I didn't understand the importance of accountability until I was probably mid-50s. And so my challenge to anyone listening now, find accountability now, find people who are going, because the whisperers will try and take you in different directions. And going back to what we mentioned maybe 5 minutes ago, coming up with a mission statement and holding yourself accountable and your
right.
manager, your booking agency accountable to that when people come along, because there will be people. I have a very conservative, Jesus-centric perspective, but there are people in our genre who are progressive. I don't necessarily want my people to be around those people because I think it moves them away from a Jesus perspective. But, Christian music is a very commercial world. And if there's a problem with our world is we're commercial first and ministry second. And in my small area of influence, I'm trying to change that because I think that's faulty. And I see things differently. And my deal is, here I am at 75. I own a third of a king country. If they want to get rid of me, they have to buy me out. Every other manager, the artist doesn't like him anymore. See you later. And there might be a few legal things, but it's gone. So I don't know anyone else. Do you know anybody else who has a deal like I have? And some people could say that's very overreaching. So this is interesting. With Rebecca, so my biggest fear with Rebecca, because I'd heard all about dad-daughter management artist agreements, that we're going to have a financial problem and she's going to want to sue me. And I thought, this is before her career started. I read a book from a guy that had the same manager for 20 years, been very successful. And what they did, they split everything. So that's what I did with Rebecca. And my accountant and my attorney said, no, you can't do that, Smallbone. That's too overreaching. It worked.
Wow.
It worked pretty well. And what it allowed me to do, just focus on Rebecca. And now with King Country, I don't focus on anybody else. I focus on, and my big thing with the King Country is worry about the real little things, like I watch social media, and then the real big things, like I talked to Mike Herb. I just left him a message on the phone last night, and I spoke to him for 2.5 hours. So my younger son does day to day, and he's brilliant at that. And so I think our way of doing things is not everyone's cup of tea. But my challenge to any artist listening, be counter the culture. And in some ways, that's being counter to the mainstream business culture, the mainstream culture that is not God-honoring. And it's also being counter the culture to how we do music business, because today, as you know, a lot of independent artists are starting to be successful. And it could mean that you, as an artist, you go and find somebody wealthy at your church who has a ministry mindset, and you get them to finance your album. And then you take it direct to streaming. Now, you need somebody behind you to do it, but I think there's got to be different ways of skinning the cat. And I think there are more of those ways open to people today than ever in history because of streaming. Streaming is it's a whole new world.
I think it's pretty cool how you think outside the box. It's punk rock, for our space and our genre.
Is he saying I'm a punk rocker? What do you think, guys?
Absolutely. Well, kind of related to what you were just saying, you've seen Christian music change over the decades. What has stayed the same about what truly connects to listeners and what's changed?
I think people are looking for truth in music. I think when I first started in Christian music, well, interestingly enough, I started 50 years ago, and I managed a gospel group in Australia called Family, and we had a mainstream deal, and with a mainstream record label, they did very well. In the early days of Christian music, you had Maranatha, came out of the church. You had Sparrow, which was Billy Ray Hearn, and then his son, Bill Hearn. It was independently owned. Now, the main difference, and I would, probably get some flack for this, but I think in those early days, because we had, out of the Jesus Revolution, we had revival, and I think we were very spirit-led. I think it went away from being spirit-led to, being corporately controlled. But I think it's coming back. You got Elevation, which is a worship label out of the church. And even you got Air One, and you've got worship stations. I think we're getting back to basics. And I think it's a pretty good thing. I think you can become a millionaire now doing Christian music, which I don't think you could do 50 years ago. And I think if I can leave anyone listening with any help, I'd say come up with a mission statement. Okay, what am I really trying to do? Because people will want to come and fiddle with your mission. And maybe on occasions, the mission statement can change. I think what's happened to this old bloke through the process of losing everything 35 years ago, it moved him from lukewarm to passionate. And that happened because I saw the hands and feet of Jesus in the church. The industry couldn't care less about me. So maybe my message is don't be too reliant on the industry, because the industry will let you down. But the church loves on the brokenhearted, and they'll be there for you no matter what, like they were for me. So look at having a church focus more so than an industry focus. And this is, not everyone agrees with me, but having done it, I started at 16, so I've been doing it for 59 years. I was in groups when I first started, and I played double bass, and I was the least musical, but I was the organizer. I would organize all the concerts, do all the promotion. I organized a coffee shop once a month at our church. And so that's what got me started in. But I'm so excited that you're committed to sharing this wonderful message, this idea of loving on the brokenhearted with hope. What a wonderful and purposeful thing that we're allowed to do.
Amen. Last two questions. So first one, if you could sit down with your 39-year-old self, what would you say to him?
I would say, don't wait as long as I did. Get serious about Jesus now. I was lukewarm then. I'd been given a wonderful life, wonderful wife. I worked mainstream TV, mainstream radio, mainstream record label, done it all. But I bought into what I call the show business lie. And if it takes you to fail a little bit, well, go and fail, because if it brings you closer to Jesus. You look at Paul. Paul had a pretty rocky life, then had a Damascus experience, changed the world. I would like to be a small conduit in sharing this wonderful message. So don't wait as long as I did.
If you had 60 seconds to speak directly to the next generation of Christian artists, what would you say?
Find community that you can do life with. Find people who have a Jesus perspective more so than a commercial perspective. Go deeper with Jesus. Pray fervently. Look for the right partner in life. I cry when I think about my wife committing to marry me 50 years ago. Find accountability partners that you can talk deep life with. Be careful about those around you who just say how wonderful you are. Find friends who you can partner with in life and in ministry that you can go deep with.
David Smallbone, thank you for joining us today.
Blessings on you, my son. No, so good to be with you. I love what you and your family are doing, and honored that we do life together.
Honor's all mine. I appreciate you, man.
Godspeed.